la religion.
Thank you so much. I'm Daniel Yaffe, founder of AnyRoad. We're an experiential data platform for brands to scale and optimize customer experiences that change behavior. We work with a whole bunch of brands that folks are familiar with, like Anheuser-Busch, Michaels, Caruso, Dick's Sporting Goods, and Diageo. Greg, I don't know if you want to do a quick introduction.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's great to be here. I've most recently been the global retail director at Diageo. Spent the last 15 years of my career in executive roles, driving retail and omni-channel transformations and creating brand home destinations for some of the world's best known brands like Johnnie Walker, Tommy Hilfiger, Calvin Klein, and Home Depot. So excited to talk about the role of luxury experiences in the world of retail.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I guess we'll start off the Johnnie Walker Princess Street. Tell us about this monolithic, massive experience that you really spearheaded over in Edinburgh.
Well, we opened up to the public about 7 weeks ago, so it's still really fresh and new, but it was a 4+ year journey, and a really interesting one too, because it wasn't as though we were asked by our team to go build an 8-story, 7,000 square meter brand experience center for Johnnie Walker. Right there was it started with a problem or a challenge, which was, how do we make the Scotch whiskey, and in particular blended Scotch whiskey, more talkable, more shareable? How does it get more share of voice with media, with the trade, with consumers? And it kind of led us down this journey and this investment program, which is, as we understand it, the largest ever in the world of Scotch whiskey, 185 million pounds, which is about $250 million. And that is not just to create Johnnie Walker Princess Street in Edinburgh, but also to transform 12 of our existing distillery single malt experiences and to create luxury brand experiences for Brora and Port Ellen. So massive undertaking. Basically, we built a whole new business in Scotland. Mm-hmm. Created the whole organization around it. The P&Ls, the business case. Started over completely with technology. Built a retail supply chain. All of those elements that went into setting this up, because if you're going to do something like this, and you're going to put your brands forward in front of the consumer in a way that you've never done before, you don't want to take any chances. You want to make sure you do everything right.
Wow, I cannot wait to get over there. A lot of brands say that experiences drive loyalty, right? And our whole company is predicated on this as an experiential data platform. Our whole company is predicated on the idea that it's experiences that are going to drive your behavior down the line, right? You can advertise Johnnie Walker all day, every day to me, but until I have an experience with Johnnie Walker, I'm never going to become a loyal enthusiast and go choose it out at a bar. I am curious though, when it comes to luxury, how is that different? Like, what have you built in the Johnnie Walker experience or in your career where luxury maybe takes us a little bit of a different route? What's important?
Well, I think luxury purchases for consumers, while they're considered, in particular, they tend to be emotional, right? In simple terms, it's the distinction between want and need, right? I don't think anybody really needs a $10,000 bottle of whiskey, but maybe a lot of people would want to have a $10,000 bottle of whiskey. Now, how do you create emotional connections, right, in luxury? Well, a lot of that is done through storytelling. It's done through human connection, particularly if you're talking about physical spaces. It's probably why luxury has been a little bit slower to move in terms of digital commerce than some other spaces, is because the human connection is such an important part of creating that emotional connection and driving loyalty. I think for luxury, the stakes are higher. You typically are dealing with consumers that have higher lifetime value. They tend to spend more, and they may not visit as frequently, but the purchases are much larger. So you kind of have to get everything right. And that involves the things that you can see, obviously design, the people that you have, the systems that you use, everything else, but also all those little details that you might not notice, but that leave you wondering what's wrong with this experience and why didn't it resonate with me?
What are you all using now, or how have you thought about measuring that or understanding that? I mean, it's one thing to invest 250 million pounds. It's quite another to understand and make sure that you get it right.
Well, it started with mapping out the end-to-end consumer journey, right? I think we know that most of our whether it's a visit into retail or a visit into one of our brand home experiences for a tour, for most people that journey starts online. We know, I think it's over 80% of our tickets that are booked to go to one of our experiences in Scotland are pre-booked online. So what we need to make sure of is that we're capturing that consumer data throughout all of the touch points. So from that moment of when you get online to when you're leaving and even beyond. And so a big part of that, obviously AnyRoad played a big role in this, where we worked with you guys to set up personalization services online that would allow us to gather information about using AI to drive. And I'm sorry, there's an alarm going off. This is always the danger of when you're doing this from home. There's an alarm going off.
Actually live.
We'll try to power through it. But yeah, so it's about, we've used that, worked with AnyRoad to set up that personalization element that goes from the booking to what happens when you physically arrive to how we connect with you as you leave and beyond. And that involves getting feedback from you as a consumer about what can we do better, how can we improve, but also getting us information so that we can stay in touch and potentially recommend other things that you might like, whether that's another experience or another whiskey or another bottle that we might offer. And so we do look at it, we don't have it all figured out yet, to be honest, in terms of like measuring lifetime value, because a lot of this is relatively new for us in terms of this depth. But our focus is to gather as much data as we can without being obtrusive with the consumer.
Yep.
Learn from it, apply it as we can, and then we'll work through down the road as to how we use it. But fortunately, like for example, in UK, where currently most of our visits are coming from due to travel restrictions, we have our own e-commerce there. So it's very straightforward for us after the visit to then come back to you and say, if you liked this while you were at Johnnie Walker Princess Street at one of our distilleries, you might also like this and that.
That's awesome. I think in Europe it's a bit different. Like the e-commerce is a little bit more D2C, right?
There is a little more freedom in terms of what you can do in the alcohol space. It's true. Not the case for fashion and some other categories that I've worked in, but particularly in the alcohol space, you're able to sell direct to consumer in most countries, whereas in the US you have the three-tiered system. So while you can, but the exception to that is when you have a production facility. So if you have like Guinness Open Gate in Baltimore, or you've got Bullet in Kentucky, we have the ability to engage the consumer directly there at the experience, sell to them. But then typically after the visit, we would hand them over to one of our distributors or retail partners to follow up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. If we can get specific about how you're using the data that you're capturing, I'm sure a lot of people say, capture as much as you can, and then what? And then what are you actually doing with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think, it's the macro and the micro, right? You want to know, of course, the demographics of who's coming, where are they from? Are they male or female? How old are they in general? Because that helps you to understand if you're attracting the kind of demographics that you are wanting to. I mean, these brand experiences that we've created in Scotland. Of course, they're great for someone who's already into Scotch whiskey, but they're even more valuable as acquisition tools.
That's awesome.
And so we want to understand the demographics, but we also want to understand the specific information about those people. I mentioned before that we'll use AI data related to food preferences actually to customize the drinks that you'll have. So we actually use the data first and foremost to create a better chance that someone will have a positive experience with whiskey when they get to Johnnie Walker Princess Street. Because to make it an acquisition tool, we have to hit the mark on that. We also want to understand what's their level of engagement with the brand going into it. Are they a little skeptical, the brand or the brand home experience? Maybe they're even a detractor. Maybe they really are. Maybe they were dragged along to this and they're not sure if they want to do this. And so we will want to understand to what extent have we converted people to the brand, changed their whole perception around it. And then we want to get that direct feedback. I mean, we've already, for example, had a couple of, we've had repeated feedback about a couple of things in our main tour experience at Johnnie Walker Princess Street related to the volume of the music and related to a couple of rooms where people are being asked to stand in one place for a long period of time. And we've been making some adjustments to the experience based upon that consumer feedback. And as you know, when you get the feedback directly from the consumer, you take action on it a lot more quickly than if it's coming from your own observations. A lot of times it validates what you've already intuitively figured out, but suddenly when the consumer tells you, it has to change immediately.
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're looking at it. And we have also done some other studies, not yet for Johnnie Walker Princess Street, where we measure return on experience, because one of the big things that's happening in particularly in retail, physical retail, as you know, more and more transactions have moved online, and people are wondering what's the role of the physical store? Should I have stores? How many should I close? Which one should I close? Is to understand the overall impact that the store has as a marketing asset, and not only straight as a four-wall P&L.
Totally.
So we also, for example, we did this with the flagship retail store that we created for Johnnie Walker about 3 years ago. In the first year and a half we were open, we measured what's the PR and the media value and all of that for the market. So, and then we also looked at what impact was it having on market level performance relative to other markets in Europe. And we saw, for example, at Johnnie Walker in Madrid, that we delivered 4.8 million euros of return on experience value in the first year and a half. Now that's a lot more than what it was doing in revenue.
Yeah.
But because we had, over 100,000 people who came in to the store in the first year, we had, we were on a street front where millions of people would pass by the storefront, and also just the launch events and the experiences that we had. We had master classes and trainings, and there's a bar within the retail space, like right in the window.
That's awesome.
Those kinds of things create a lot of value. They create talkability in the market. And so suddenly, for example, Johnnie Walker went from being pretty far behind Jack Daniel's in terms of awareness and talkability to being ahead of it in the time frame from before we opened to a year and a half after opening.
That's awesome.
So you do look at it as a competitive set. You want to understand how are we impacting the market, and then we probably were getting a lot of other benefit from the international visitor who's going back and telling people about it, sharing it on social media and all that. And of course, there's the user-generated content and everything you get from these experiences that we as consumers value much more than when a brand or a company is telling you how great they are. If you've got people that are paying for the visit coming back and saying, that was amazing, you got to do this, I've never seen anything like this, the brand surprised me, that's when you get real transformation.
That's awesome. Aside from the data and outputs that you're getting from AnyRoad, are you working with agencies? How are you figuring out the full scope ROE, return on the experience?
Well, there is an element in terms of agencies. Well, yeah, we like to, you've got to figure out what is the experience, right? What is your core theme? What is it we want the key audience takeaway to be? Of course, as you know, we worked with BRC Imagination Arts on our Scotland projects, and Johnnie Walker Princess Street in particular. They played a massive role in that, because you really do need to understand what is it that you're going to, what are you going to tell people? But it can't be a one-way conversation, right? A lot of what we've done and what we've worked with BRC on is how do we create participation and a whole nother level of engagement? Because one of the intrinsic value elements of retail, but especially a brand home, is time spent. So when you can get someone to spend 30 minutes, an hour and a half, even sometimes a half a day with your brand, actually paying to hear your brand messages, then those people become brand fans for life, and they tell people about it as well. But you have to do it in the right way. If it's just brand, hammering people over the head,
totally,
you won't get there. So the guiding light is the guest experience, and what do they want. We also look at, of course, what are the brand needs? We have to make sure that we kind of get our value at that. That's why we do it in the first place. Ultimately, is in support of the brands. But we also have to look at the commercial side of things, because these are designed to make money, to stand on their own, and be adding EBIT and such to the overall company performance. And then also you have to look at community engagement and, you know, sustainability, accessibility,
Totally.
inclusivity, because when you're putting your brand in front of the consumer, and this kind of goes back to your original question about luxury, that physical experience in particular, it embodies your brand.
Mhm.
And so if you have a brand purpose, for example, that centers around inclusivity or diversity,
Mhm.
and someone goes to your physical space and they don't see and feel and experience that, then you're not authentic and you're not
Yeah.
living your purpose. And
Yeah.
so we make a real strong point in everything we do to ensure that that is front and center. Like an example would be in the area of sustainability, which, you know, Johnnie Walker is a brand that is doing a lot in that space. I mean, at least the part of the whole product journey that we can control, which is, you know, production and packaging and things like that. We said, look, we want every single one of our brand experience centers in Scotland to have the highest possible accreditation for green tourism. And every single one of them, including Johnnie Walker Princess Street, got the gold standard.
Awesome.
You get a plaque on the door, you get a mention. It doesn't add a lot of value, but it's just one of those little things that has a huge impact. So, you know, we worked with Ewan's Guide, who is they're a charity for helping people who travel, in particular with disabilities. And we work with them to how do we make all of our sites and Johnnie Walker Princess Street as accessible as possible? How do we manage expectations before people get there so they'll know what they can and maybe cannot experience fully? And they, for example, they came in and evaluated what we did at Johnnie Walker Princess Street and said it was one of the best guest experiences they had ever been to.
Wow. Wow.
And those kinds of things, first of all, it's like, it makes us feel good. But also it's something that we think is really powerful, and that consumers, they do really care about what the brands stand for more so than ever, because look, as a consumer, we have so much choice.
Yeah.
We have so many decisions to make every day.
Absolutely.
And so those kinds of things, if you can have somebody, you know, feel that emotional connection to your brand, and it may be for something, it could be around sustainability, it could be around the brand itself, it could be around the quality of it, whatever that may be, you create brand fans for life.
I love that. It reminds me of a framework that we have about one-dimensional metrics for experiences and three-dimensional metrics. One-dimensional metrics are like how many people came into this brand home, or if you're, you know, luxury retail, how many people walked through the store, and it doesn't tell you, right? It's a leading indicator of, you know, if next year we're sitting here in Johnnie Walker experience in Edinburgh on Princess Street has, you know, a couple 100,000 people, that's a number. It doesn't tell you the impact that it had, and that's the three-dimensional metrics that a lot of brands come to us for, because that's the reason you built it. In a lot of ways.
Well, in a lot of the traditional KPIs, performance KPIs for retail and brand homes, they measure the outcome, but they don't measure the journey. And that's really what's important, is to understand along the way, right? So like in, you know, traditional retail, you know, you're talking about conversion rate and units per transaction and average transaction value. That's great, but like, you can't say that your goal is to increase conversion. You would say, what are the behaviors that will result in increasing conversion, and then live those behaviors every day and get your staff and excited about it. Make sure that everything that you do, including the technology, is working to support all of that, rather than focusing in on like, you've got to hit a 25% conversion rate, otherwise you failed.
Yeah. One of the things I think about a lot too is conversion is interesting, because if you and I both go to the Johnnie Walker Princess Street, maybe I have the intention, I love Johnnie Walker, I have the intention of buying something. So like my conversion rate, I convert, but the experience actually did nothing, right? Where maybe you're new to the brand, you've never had Johnnie Walker, you know, and you've never bought a bottle of whiskey. And that would be, in a lot of ways, a much more massive lift than getting me, who drinks it all the time, to buy a bottle. And that context is often missing. That is the journey that you're talking about.
Well, we also, what that also led to, in the example you've put out there, is very common. What it means is we can't have a one size fits all experience either.
Yeah.
Because you and I could go do the same experience, pay the same price, but be in a completely different place in their whiskey journey. Now, if you really want a connoisseur experience, we have something different besides like the main journey of flavor experience. But we also set up the journey of flavor so that you could have like almost like a snobby connoisseur going through that and being blown away and feeling like surprised and different about whiskey and seeing it presented in a way that they probably haven't seen before, but also in a respectful way and in a way that doesn't like dumb it down.
Yeah.
Also the person that is like, I don't like whiskey and I'm sure that I don't like whiskey. You're not going to convince me otherwise. We give you a great drink that's tailored to your flavor profile. We add a little fun, a little theater, performance artist here and there, lots of technology. And then hopefully we change your mindset. And then those are the people, those are the real people that become, if you can take someone like that, who's a real skeptic and make them a fan,
that's huge.
And you know, it makes a really big difference. But we also don't want to lose the people that are existing consumers, because there are going to be people that are going to make a pilgrimage from all around the world to come to Johnnie Walker, because it's a brand that's sold in over 180 countries. And some of our biggest markets are far, far away. And so those people, you know, you'll have the people that will stumble upon it because they happen to be in Edinburgh and maybe they see a billboard or they walk past it or they see something at the airport. You have other people that are going to go there. They're going to say, I'm going to Edinburgh because I want to, you know, get closer to Johnnie Walker. And we have to appeal to both of those groups.
Yeah, super interesting. What other brands that you can think of are on the luxury side are doing this really, really well, besides Diageo or besides Diageo's brands? Like, where have you seen luxury experiences that blow you away? Or conversely, I don't know if you want to call out, but brands that are really doing this poorly?
I mean, I think that you do see, I think in luxury fashion, and I would say probably if you point to some things that are happening in Asia, and particularly in China, like I see, you know, some of the things, and some of it is you've got a consumer base that's like really anxious to, I mean, they still will go to stores, but they expect the store experience to be very different. You know, they're using AI, AR, they're even doing virtual retail. So when people, you know, they're using the store as like, I mean, more than a showroom, I should say, but it's like where really you've got it that people are, because that physical space does have a lot of power. And you know, and consumers are responding to that, because it's the ones that are doing it the best are the ones that are truly seamless between online and offline. And they haven't, and it still surprises me how many companies, including some that I've worked for before, silo the physical retail from the e-commerce. Sometimes they'll literally have the two businesses working in different P&Ls. Maybe one is in the market and one is in global or corporate. They have people who, you know, sometimes have competing or conflicting interests. And, you know, and the consumer can sense that. And that's where becomes a lot of friction that comes in, you know, in this idea of like, I've now got, I buy something online but I want to be able to return it to a store because I know there's a store nearby. And they say, I'm sorry, no, you can't, we don't take online returns back here.
That's crazy.
And you've got to now go through the extra hassle of having to go and like package it up and take it to a post office and send it versus now I may have, you know, maybe I like the online piece because maybe I don't want to engage with a human, but then when it comes time for me to be able to handle the return, I'd like that to be as easy as possible. So sometimes, you know, and it's hard to say, like, I mean, there are a lot of really good examples. And I think, you know, the ones that are doing it well are also experimenting a lot. And I think, like, you know, I mean, probably Nike is a great example, I would say, and they're not necessarily in the luxury space, but they, you know, they create community. They've definitely gone, and I mean, that's they're the holy grail of a brand that has said, we want to control the consumer experience. And you know, then I think they're now something like around 50% of their revenues come from direct to consumer, so physical and digital direct to consumer, and then the other 50% is wholesale. And you know, they're going to great expense to build experiential spaces where people want to spend time, and it really works. So you know, it's also you're creating a cultural experience and a cultural environment that you just can't do through traditional marketing comms and through PR, things like that.
I love that.
So, but there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. And this is, I think, what's so exciting, you know, and COVID has accelerated a lot of these trends, created a lot of need, you know, a lot of experimentation, innovation, disruption, and, you know, the sort of the death of the high street and everything is, it's really just as the high street is changing, and certain, you know, brands and companies that haven't kept up are going to go away, and you can have other ones replace them that are going to be, you know, most likely, I mean, unless they're like a value player, chances are they're going to be doing something that's going to be more experiential more participatory, fully omni-channel, probably even, a brand that started online as digital native kind of brand, and then said, actually we're missing out on this physical human connection piece, and we need to have stores actually that link into our, physical, like Warby Parker.
Warby Parker, yeah, absolutely. Or Casper.
I've heard at a conference that they have almost 150 stores, and this is a brand that 10 years ago said, we don't need stores. Nobody needs stores. We just buy glassware online. But they were realizing that, return rates were so high and they weren't really making any money. And then when they started adding the physical in, well, guess what? Wherever they put a physical store, their e-commerce business grew exponentially too. And so, but I'm sure, I don't know how they measure the success of their physical stores, but I can assure you that they probably look at a holistic P&L rather than just looking at the stores and whether or not the one store on that street is making money by itself or not.
100%. Well, it's interesting in the broader scope. Amazon is obviously the big gorilla in the room and doing really well. It's all direct to consumer. They have all of that data. Amazon now is investing in physical stores, right? Absolutely. I don't know what it looks like in Amsterdam, but here they're testing being a new city. Amazon has a bookstore. Amazon has a retail shop. Super fascinating, and I'm sure they're getting a whole other data set from that.
Yeah, I think there's a number of reasons for that, and I think part of it is that their online experience, has probably never really been experiential. It is the epitome of unlimited choice. And I think there's it's a combination of that, like physical experience, but also it's because shopping on Amazon is great if you're looking for something in particular. You know that they're going to have almost everything, but you don't really go to Amazon to browse because it's not particularly curated. And so a lot of what I think these physical environments is to create a curated assortment. And it's particularly important, like in fashion. There's so many choices. And it's not just about touching and feeling. It's also about like a brand that you trust and like, or even a multi-brand place that you trust and like. Curating, this is what I should be wearing. This is what I should be liking. This is what I should be buying. As opposed to, because we don't have time as consumers to filter through all of that. Right. Again, unless you're going through like and this is probably why they were able to, Amazon could dominate the category of books, because while there will always be a subset of people that like hanging out in bookstores, oftentimes when you're shopping, there's nothing worse than you've got a book for book club and you go into a bookstore and you're asking if they have it and they don't have it. And then you're going from, I remember what this was like. You go from bookstore to bookstore trying to find that one book, but that Amazon's going to have it and probably going to get it to you in 2 days. Right. But it doesn't work as well if it's something that needs to be like, that it's more thoughtful, that's more emotional, as opposed to I need it now or I need it soon. Right. If I'm reading this correctly, it'll never work. That'll never work for luxury, because luxury is all about building that connection and having that experience. Like that just transactional piece is missing that relationship. Yeah. Well, the other thing about the other reason why Amazon's doing it is they're setting it up for that last mile delivery piece, right? Because they want to be faster and faster. And so if they can create physical spaces, and this is what you're seeing also a lot, you're seeing this starting to happen in luxury too, is that brands are using their physical stores as fulfillment centers, as omni-channel hubs of commerce. So not only is it like buy online, pick up in store, which is not new, it's actually buy online and ship from store, because the stores are close to the population density. And it's much easier. They're partnering with, like the fast delivery companies, and so on, to be able to do the fulfillment, like, same day, within an hour, 2 hours, what we're starting to see with grocery now, where, you can get it in 10 minutes. And that's because they're creating these little pop-up spaces in the neighborhoods where you can go online and have your grocery delivery within 10 minutes. So it's all about the speed and the convenience element. But even luxury brands are realizing that that's necessary, but you just want to make sure that the convenience doesn't dilute the value of your brand, the intrinsic value of your brand, because in luxury, you have to have some level of scarcity, right? If you're all things to all people, you're not really luxury. That's super interesting. I want to harken back to, you mentioned Nike is great at experimentation. And this is something a lot of brands come to us for, because they say, we don't want to just invest in an experience. We want to be able to iterate it, be able to improve it. I'm curious,
if you think about the experiences either that you've created at Johnnie Walker Princess Street or just more generally speaking for luxury, where do you think experiences will iterate into the future? Like if we could take out Greg's crystal ball and look 10, 15, maybe even 20 years down the line.
Well, I think that the importance of first party consumer data becomes even more critical. I mean, it's not to say that that's anything new per se, but it's going to become even more important, and that's going to require, you know, seamless, like all of your different systems have to be fully integrated so that you've got that full view of the consumer. It's also going to be about tying up your inventory. So, I mean, again, it's this idea of like, you know, people are going to want to go and they're going to be, when I'm online, and most people pre-shop online before they go to a store. If they're going to go to a store at all, a lot of times they go online, they finish the transaction there. Sometimes they go online to start getting a sense of what it is they might want. And it's even better if when you're looking at something, you can see if it's available in your local store, because you might need it today, or you might want it today. There is the instant, that's one of the things that stores will always be there for, is the instant gratification of, you know, I mean, of course, it's also sometimes fun to get deliveries at your home, but it's nice when you can go have something right away. So I think you're going to see, you know, a big part of that. I think you're going to see, you know, that there's one of the trends that's happened during COVID, which I think is going to continue, is localization, and this need that you need to, you know, appeal to your community, you know, with hyper targeted comms and regional and local innovations, different assortments, those kinds of things, even if you're a global brand. And that's particularly going to be true if, you know, until people are able to really travel as freely, because, you know, there's a lot of brands that have depended heavily on the international tourist.
Yep.
A lot of brands, in particular, for example, that counted on like Chinese tourists in Europe who don't have them anymore. And then they have to sort of shift their whole focus to, now how do I appeal to locals? Maybe who wouldn't have gone in there in the past. And so how can you do that to connect it all? So I think, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff, and it's hard to predict, you know, what things are going to be like in 10 years or so, because everything is changing so fast. Right. You know, some of the technology that is out there now, we couldn't have even envisioned would be around 10 years ago.
Totally true.
And so it's going to be it's going to be a wild ride, and I think the consumer is going to continue to be king. Yeah. So, you know, as a brand, as a retailer, as a, you know, a marketplace retailer, that we all have to be thinking about the consumer first and foremost, and that has to be at the center of everything we do. Even if you're an FMCG company, to be honest, like a Diageo, you got to be thinking about what does the consumer want, because in that world of endless choice, you can't count on necessarily your retail or distributor or wholesale partners to steer the consumer to your brand or brands, or to talk about your brands in the way that you want them to talk about it. So you're going to have to control the conversation a little bit more, and it's going to take more than just traditional advertising and social media engagement to do that.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned COVID briefly, and of course, it's the elephant in the room. Hopefully, we're passing it soon, at least in the US or Western Europe. But I'm curious. A lot of people have asked me, and I'm curious on Diageo's side. I mean, investing 250 million pounds into a brand experience during the largest global pandemic that we've seen in many, many years. I'm curious, how did things change? How did you think about things differently, or did you at the brand? And because of course, Johnnie Walker Princess Street will be there much longer than COVID will be there. So I'm curious how you balance those two things, like thinking about the global pandemic for maybe the next year or two, however long it takes to trickle out, as well as with where it's going to be after that.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt that, like, while, you know, capacity restrictions are in place and global travel is restricted, it definitely has an impact on the commercial performance of the brand experiences. But we were always taking a long view of what we were doing, and we do feel as though, and in fact, you've seen this a lot, and you see this, you know, it started in China and places like Australia, that when physical retail and experiences opened back up again, people like were waiting in line to be able to do it. And so there's a bit of a, you know, you have the shift to e-commerce. I think e-commerce penetration, you know, has accelerated. They say it's, you know, 5 to 10 years of acceleration in the course of a year and a half, but it's still unlikely that it's going to pass, you know, 40, 50% of total retail transactions. So there's still going to be a place for physical retail. But what we did in terms of the way we had designed the experiences, which was fortunate, but I think it was part of our strategy intentionally, was all of our experiences are small groups, guide-led, very interactive, participatory. So, it'd be one thing if we had designed something where we're like, we got to get, 2 million people through our building, and you buy a ticket and you roam around for 2 hours, which would make people feel pretty uncomfortable because, it's a lot of people, and maybe people that probably the last thing people are ready for is crowds. But people are okay with smaller groups if you know that the experience has really good health and safety protocols in place. Then you're okay with mixing with some small groups. You know that people are vaccinated, that they've done health checks, those kinds of things. And that's what we've done. So we stayed the course. And again, we had our executive team, give them a lot of credit. There was a strong belief from them in what we were doing. And I think that was validated when we opened up Johnnie Walker Princess Street and people got to see it. And they were kind of like, wow, okay, renders and video walkthroughs of work in progress does not do this stuff justice. Or when we take someone out to Glenkinchie or to one of the transformed distillery experiences. And so, it's just people are going to crave human connection even more so than ever. And if anything, it's a little bit like, it's like we were talking earlier about weather. And if you live in a place like I do in Amsterdam, where the weather's not great, when the weather's really nice, it makes you appreciate it that much more. And I think that with the same thing is true with this. It doesn't mean that, digital experiences are here to stay. We did invest in creating digital versions, but they're still designed in a sense to create desire for the physical in-person experiences, first and foremost. So, but it's going to be an evolving thing. We're going to be looking and seeing this. And, our big challenge is probably how do we take the experiences that we've created in Scotland and make it so that people who can't come to Scotland can experience them as well.
That's awesome. We think about experiential on a maturity curve, right? Oftentimes they're the brands that don't even know they're supposed to be doing experiences. They're behind the curve, I would say. And then there's the brands that do it that aren't measuring it. It sounds like you all are pretty far along in the maturity curve. There's been a data gap historically. You're measuring it. You're understanding how to iterate it. I'm curious if you were to talk to a brand that's maybe earlier on in the maturity curve that doesn't know that experiences and experiential is going to be an important part of their strategy, and maybe you were to mentor them or be consulting with them, what advice would you have? Like how would they approach experiences? Let's take an example like just a luxury brand.
I mean, I think you need to understand the current reality of your consumer. I mean, I guess there's who are your current consumers and who are you trying to reach, and how do they feel about it? I mean, like we had, before we really got going on this big Scotland project, we did a good bit of consumer research, right? We did a combination of exit interviews from our distillery experiences before we did any transformations. We did social listening. We did online surveys. We wanted to understand, because we didn't have that data before, right? Before we put in AnyRoad, to be honest, we knew where they were from, and we might have known how old they were, but we had no idea what was their experience with whiskey, and then how did it impact future purchase behaviors. So I think it's to understand, because it's not necessarily to say that everyone should do experiential. I mean, if you're in fast fashion, for example, and I won't name any brands, it's probably more about operational efficiency. You're going to have bare bones service, but you're trying to reduce general friction. You want to get people through. You want to keep the stores relatively neat and organized. Your supply chain, in terms of fast replenishment becomes really important. But I think, in the luxury space, it's going to be about that depth of experience. I don't really see that changing a lot in the coming years. So, yeah.
No, that's awesome. What role do the human connection play? I know you and I have had conversations offline about the staffing element of the experience, and that's huge, right? I mean, especially retail, that person's the face of the brand. Yeah,
I think that a lot of it is, you maybe in retail in terms of consumer facing roles, you probably hire more for, I don't want to say personality, but like the term we used in the company I worked for before is we want people who are outwardly friendly. They might not be an extrovert, but they like talking to people, in that environment, and they want to engage. They may not even necessarily have direct retail experience. Now, you need to have people in the leadership roles that have that specific experience. But most of the people, for example, that we hired for Johnnie Walker Princess Street, and the exception of being like the head bartender or that kind of thing, or they didn't necessarily have experience in whiskey, let alone alcohol. And because you can teach that stuff.
Totally.
I think it's harder to teach is to have somebody who feels comfortable going up and having a conversation, with someone who comes in, with a guest, with a visitor, whatever you call them. Someone who's comfortable, like with little kind acts of generosity. Like one of the things that we tried to establish, particularly we did this in Madrid and we tried to carry over into Scotland, is the idea of like try before you buy. I mean, most places that offer, if you go to like most liquor stores, unless they're doing like a special tasting or something, you can't really try it. And so you don't get a chance to get a sense of if you like it or not. And so I think it's, building people, bringing in people that are open-minded, that are outwardly friendly. They have a certain mindset where they like, it's not even service oriented. Again, it's more engagement oriented.
Right.
Is really the key thing around. And then of course, when you're talking about tour experiences, that's different. You have to have somebody that can present well. In case we have performance artists, Johnnie Walker Princess Street, they are like literally, a lot of them come from theater backgrounds, but they bring their own personal style. We might give them, this is kind of what we want you to say, but they bring their own life to it. And they tell the story in their own way, because what it comes down to is that, people love hearing stories about people told by people. Whether it's stories of struggle or stories of hardships or stories of failure, stories of successes, and that thing. And so we try not to get too technical. I mean, we have a few experiences that can be quite technical for the people that are interested in that. But by and large, we talk about flavor creation rather than getting into the technical details of how we make whiskey. We talk about the points on where flavor is created in the process and the decision points. When we could say we could go smoky or we could go not smoky, for example. And then the people, though, even though there's all kinds of technology behind that, are what bring it to life.
That's awesome. Do you think there's a role for, let's say, like partnerships, or we're seeing a lot of brands testing this now, which is like take our luxury brand, pair it with another luxury brand. I think Macallan did something with Aston Martin, for example. Are you seeing opportunities for that? Are you seeing, or do you feel like the brand experience should really be set apart from other brands?
Well, I think there's natural associations of brands, and then I think there's also, it's like how do you make sure that it's a partnership and not a sponsorship?
Yeah, totally.
And not to say that sponsorships can't work, and certainly they can, but it's like there has to be that natural connection between the two, and it has to be like mutually beneficial, even if one side is having to pay for it. There needs to be something that each side is getting out of it. And I see, I mean, the obvious thing that's been around for a long time is like sort of the shop and shops within department stores and things like that. And you're seeing actually more and more of that. I think it was Sephora that they have a big arrangement with Kohl's, the department store, to like set up in store shop and shops in Kohl's. I mean, and while Sephora is probably paying for the space, Kohl's is probably going to benefit from it as much as they are. So, I think that's where you look at it as well, as if there's a symbiotic relationship, and also where you're seeing a lot. And this is, I don't know if you're familiar with Zalando. They're an e-commerce marketplace, based in Germany, but they sell throughout Europe. And they've set up this thing called, connected retail. And basically what it is, it's similar to Amazon, but it's actually gives more control to the retailer and the brand. And so you're getting the eyeballs, you're getting the consumer base that Zalando provides, but you're actually doing the fulfillment yourself, but it's linking into your stores. So what it is that they're putting up your store inventory on Zalando, along with some of the stuff that they sell their own. They do their own fulfillment as well. But it really creates like a true omni-channel experience, and it allows a retailer and a brand to have their space be more productive. That's the thing that's challenged. It's like the cost of doing business in retail is much higher. The profit margins are much lower than they used to be. So anything you can do that will give you that extended reach and more value is as well.
That's awesome. Greg, I think we're at time, but thank you so much. This has been wonderful. Can't wait to get out to Edinburgh to see Johnnie Walker Princess Street. I've been hearing about it for now years, but it sounds like you've created an absolutely incredible consumer experience there.
Can't wait for you to see it.
Yeah, thanks so much. Have a wonderful evening.
You too. Take care.
Take care.